Jesus said, I will build my... That means we can. Is church too complicated? Maybe it needs to be more simple. Can I just say, simple was that bottom word, I still haven't written it in. When I say simple, I don't mean easy. I can hear some groans. Church is a group of people, something with God, strolling with God. Okay, I want to start with so there's actually all kinds of ways we could go to this afternoon. The key thing is I want you to feel like you're doing some work and not sitting listening. So we'll cut in and out of times where, is that too close? Cut in and out of times if we're, listening or you're talking together or you're sitting thinking. But the bit that I missed this morning, which I kind of, even when we were debriefing briefly, I regretted skipping over it. Because, when you've got something that's a whole and then when you miss a bit out, other bits of it don't make sense. So I want to just touch base on that, if that's okay. And then just an opportunity to reflect. I've had lovely feedback, people talking and asking questions. There might be something that you think, like, that's rubbish, or let's talk about that, or, something like that from this morning. We don't have to. It's just if you've got something burning that you think it would be good to tease out. And then I'm going to tell you, so I'm going to offer you a process, how to start something from scratch. You have to do all the work that we did this morning before you get started. So let's assume we've done that. And then I will use a couple of stories from Kiwi Church that we did. And then when I read about the process that I'm going to offer, I thought, oh yeah, that was kind of our story. I didn't follow the process. In fact, you tell me, give me a blueprint or this is how you do it, I'm kind of allergic to that as well. Going, really? I don't know if that's exactly, it's not we're not paint by numbers is probably the model. I mentioned this really briefly, that the Church of England in the early 2000s, they wrote this denominational report which became a bestseller, which is hilarious, really, when you think about it. And when you read it, it's definitely an institutional document. But they said the Nicene Creed, the church is one holy Catholic apostolic church. They said, let's look at that and say, if that's church, what does that mean? And they suggested that it's holy, participating in the life of the Trinity. So there's this relationship, although God's everywhere, not just vertical. That's a whole other conversation. We are one church. We are united in Christ. Apostolic in terms of in love for and service to the world, so the outward looking, and then Catholic with a capital C, part of the whole body of Christ. So historically, invisible church, all that kind of thing. Okay? They said, this is what we think the church is. That's fine. A guy called Michael Moyner came along and said, that's all fine. And they said, make sure you're doing activities in each area. So are you doing activities that are to God and activities that are to your neighbours or community or with each other, or are you connected to the wider church? This guy, Michael Moyner, said, that's all fine, but it's actually, let's keep the focus on because church is relationship. And what's our relationship with God, with each other, with the wider church, and with the community? So imagine a church for a moment, and you take away the relationship with God. What do we become? A club. If we take away the relationship with each other, what does that feel like? What's that? I'm sorry, I can't. Those answers that were great, can you say them again? They're lonely. So if the each other sphere is not there, What does that mean? What's the impact of the church? It's an institution, thank you. It's lonely, and it's kind of a religious exercise. We're not in community. If we cut off with the wider church, as in historically the wider church and the body of Christ around the world, what could that lead to eventually? A cult. So we've got to be connected. And then if we're not connected with the community, if we're not developing a relationship with the community, what's the risk then? What do we become? Irrelevant. Thank you. I mean, I was happy with kind of, disconnected and insular and those kind of things. Irrelevant will do. Yeah. That's ultimately where we end up. And in my work, it's not my work, but anyway, I was with a congregation once who we were waiting for the meeting to start. It was a parish council meeting. This probably doesn't happen in Kaimai. It happens in Christchurch. Parish council meeting. I was there as a guest, and I'm sitting. We were going to do some mission planning, and I overheard one man talking to the man beside him, and he just happened to say about his adult son, something he was doing, because you talk about that kind of stuff. And the person beside him, they'd been in parish council a long time together, said, "Have you got adult children?" And I thought, wow. I thought, how's that relationship with each other going? And so what were they there to do? Because we were waiting, remember, for 7:30 to arrive. So what were we doing that night? We're doing the business of the church. Now, I'm not against the business of the church. Please hear me. This is about starting something from scratch, okay? So if I was at another parish council meeting, a different church, and we were going through this, and I said to the parish clerk, well, I asked the group, but the parish clerk was sitting right here, faithful woman, serving the church, being part of the church all her life. And I just said, hey, so what activities do you do in each of these areas? And what activities do you do to nurture your relationship with God? The up one. And they came up with Sunday morning. And that was the only thing. And that's fine. Other churches will have small groups or, pre-meetings, that kind of thing. And they had Sunday morning. No problem with that. So I said, when you leave Sunday morning, how is your relationship with God nurtured? And she kind of blurted out, not really. And we sat quietly for a moment. I thought, that's so sad. They're doing Sunday morning, which is, as you heard me say earlier, I think is predominantly about worshipping God, and they leave no sense of God or connection with God or relationship nurtured with God. So then my follow-up question would be, anyone want to have a crack? Why are you doing it? So why? If you're taking notes, just write down why. If you're trying to remember, just think why. And that's the end of the workshop. A guy called Simon Sinek, who corporate guy, don't know if he's a man of faith, but you Google him, he goes, you've got to discover your why. Find out your why. Why are you doing this? And if we're doing Sunday morning to connect with God and to nurture a closer relationship with God and worship God, and people are leaving going, not really. It was a sad story. Community, working with another congregation. These are 3 different congregations in Christchurch. They ran a fantastic preschool program, and lots of predominantly mums, but caregivers with their preschoolers and music and stuff. And there was a lady who was serving the cup of tea, elderly lady, wonderful, faithful woman, serving the cup of tea in the morning tea and stuff. And through the course of getting to know them, discovered she didn't know anyone's names of the parents and the kids, and they didn't know her name. And that was a real stark reminder of why are we doing mainly music? But it wasn't mainly music, it was called something else. And I remember in our previous church many years ago, which ties a little bit to what Jamie was saying this morning, I remember someone, we've done mainly music for years and we're not seeing anyone come into church, and they were grumpy about that. And I thought, so we're doing mainly music because we want people in church. I think Kiwis are pretty smart people. if our why is to get people in church on Sunday morning, then, and let's be honest, often it is. It's why we did a whole lot of that community stuff back when we started doing it, However, or are we simply building a relationship with those people, getting to know their names, hearing their hurts and dreams and passions? Because guarantee if they're human beings, they've got hurts and dreams and passions. And when we hear those, so it's just not only why, it's also listen. When we hear those and we think, okay, is there a gospel response to their hurts and hopes and dreams? Which of course there is. So that was the bit I missed. And your homework was going to be in the little debrief, but you can take it home, is think through, as if you sit down with parish council one night, think through all your activities and put them in one of the circles. And they might be over two, and that's fine. It's not a science. Just go, okay, what are all the things, let's list everything we do in our calendar. Go to the newsletter or your diary or whatever, and go, we're doing this. Where does it fit? Okay, is that nurturing a relationship with the other that we are expecting it to, that's why we're doing it? Yes, no, maybe. If it's yes, awesome. Fantastic. If it's no, what are you going to do? Oh, come on. You can have a guess. What are you going to do if it's not nurturing the relationship? Stop it! Just, why not stop it? Or go, oh, okay, well, actually, no, we don't feel like God's saying stop it. So what would another question be for God? Yeah, what does it, yeah, it's simple. It could be something really, really simple. And if it's maybe, yeah, so there's your homework. Okay, so now we're kind of moving into the how do you start something from scratch. And the basic assumption that I want us to sit with is we don't know what the future likes, or is like. Someone at lunch said, is the church, the way it's expressed in 10 years' time, going to be like it is today? And I thought it was quite a courageous response. He then said no. Actually, that's a painful response as well for some. So let's not, whereas my dad is in a rest home now, and I had this moment because I was working with congregations and it's come on, we could change the way we do things and, God's blah, blah, blah. And he's moving into a rest home and I'm like, come on, Dad, it's the 21st century, you need to do this, this, and this. Actually, that's just cruel. So it's not easy. We want to be gentle with our congregations that we are all leading and the people who are in them that, you know that stuff. Okay. Turn to your neighbour and say, if you haven't learnt their name yet, find out their name. Okay. Do you know the passage? Have you ever sat in a room of people and sat and imagined the Luke 10 passage when Jesus sent people, all the disciples, out 2 by 2? Have you kind of done that kind of thing in Kaimai? Anyone? Yep. Okay. We should probably do that. What do you think, Adia? Okay. So if you don't like this, Adia's fault. No. I did genuinely was curious to see what you thought. Luke 10. Can I just say the list on the table, on the screen, is a list of labels that I could think of and others I could read that are put onto new things and some old things. I was at a group the other day and someone said Kiwi Church was a fresh expression. Fresh Expression is a brand name out of the UK, which is a fantastic movement. It was the Church of England, when they did their study, they went, we've got to do something. Fresh Expressions came out of that, and if you Google Fresh Expressions UK, you'll see all kinds of awesome stories. In fact, that's probably a better use of your time, not in this workshop, but you know what I mean? There's that sense of, you just read people's stories and you think, wow, that sounds simple, we could do that. So Fresh Expressions UK, we're not a Fresh Expression in Kiwi Church. I thought we were until Fresh Expressions, their predominant why is to meet and engage with people who have no faith and journey with them to have a fresh expression of church and for them to come to faith. Now, our heart in Kiwi Church is we desperately want people to come to faith. We've found ourselves in a different stream, and that is new monasticism. And I'm going to talk more about that later. The only reason I'm showing you this is that it's native bush. It's not a pine forest. Whatever you start in Paeroa and give it a crack would be, and probably should be, quite different to Hauraki. You know, does that make sense? So, but you might find yourself, maybe not the mega church one, let's be frank. And I've got some questions about that model, which we could talk about offline if you want. But New Mission Seedlings is the language that came out of Knox Centre in Dunedin, which I'll talk about soon. Missional communities is different to Fresh Expressions. They're like, we're just trying things that are quite different. Missional projects is like the community garden over, it's not a Hopi, where's the, thank you. Community family churches, which I would say are most of our churches. You know, we're in the community, we're a family church. New monastic alternative worship, when people do some pretty interesting things as a worship expression. Network churches or house churches. Network churches are like an underground church movement out of America. Very similar principles, but quite specific. You know, you can Google all of those and you'll find some information that I think would be helpful. There are many ways. And that guy I mentioned before, Michael Moyner, who talked about the 4 relationships, he wrote a book called Church for Every Context. And his argument was, and I agree, is the church will look different in every different context. If you're a group of surfies at the Mount, then your church will look different to the mountain bikers in the, national park. Is it real church? Absolutely, because what is church? People strolling with God and each other. Yeah. Do you know Lectio kind of exercise and Ignatian prayer, which is different, but we do this a lot at Kiwi Church. We've found that people who've been following the Lord all their lives have heard enough sermons. I don't criticize sermons, I'm just saying so we imagine and we sit with Scripture, and what are you hearing God say? And it's amazing what comes out of the community. So we've done that for years and years. I haven't preached a sermon for 12 years. Don't tell Jeff New, because he teaches sermon preaching at KCML. He's my boss. In fact, we had Jeff New. He's a fantastic lecturer for sermons, preaching. And we had him at Kiwi Church when I laughed. I said, one of the best teachers of preaching in the country, and he's at Kiwi Church. So he didn't preach. Okay, Luke 10. Could I have someone else read this? Has someone got access to a Bible? Nice to have a different voice. So the idea is when we're, thank you, when we are reading this, and can I have a female as well as the second person? Val. Awesome. I didn't want to pick on you because I thought you might hate that kind of stuff. And what I invite you to do is to take a breath If you're not off during this exercise, no problem. The horizontal spiritual discipline is a very good one. Just be careful. And the key phrase is notice what you notice. Okay? So we're trusting God, we're with God, we're trusting God to speak to us through God's body. Who speaks for God in your community? It's another whole conversation about what's your why. And we want to be, the buzzword's kind of intergenerational. I think that word's starting to get a bit tired, actually. So we're thinking about all-age discipleship. And do the children, or do the elderly, or do the people with extra learning needs, do they have a voice in our community? And can God speak through them? It's a challenging question. If it's just the clergy, honestly, we're in trouble. I can say that because I am. And remind me to tell the story about intergenerational worship and the rock, the grey rock, okay? Remind me that because it's not in my notes. So I invite you to be prayerful and to let God, can you speak through your words? If you notice something, if it comes in bold print for you, just sit with that and notice what you notice. And go, what's going on there? What might God be saying? Thanks, Ross. Oh, that's a really good question. Luke 10:1 through to 6.
After this, the Lord appointed 72 others and sent them on ahead of him, 2 by 2, into every town and place where he himself was about to go. And he said to them, "The harvest is plentiful, but the laborers are few. Therefore, pray earnestly to the Lord of the harvest to send out laborers into his harvest. Go your way. Behold, I am sending you out as lambs in the midst of wolves. Carry no money bag, no knapsack, no sandals, and greet no one on the road. Whatever house you enter, first say, 'Peace be to this house.' And if someone of peace is there, your peace will rest on them. But if not, it will return to you."
Stay in the house.
Can you repeat from 1 to 6? Sorry. Same passage. Sorry, Val. I wasn't clear.
After this, the Lord appointed 72 others and sent them 2 by 2 ahead of him to every town and place where he was about to go. He told them, "The harvest is plentiful, but the workers are few. Ask the Lord of the harvest, therefore, to send out workers into the harvest field. Go, I am sending you out like lambs among wolves. Do not take a purse or bag or sandals, and do not greet anyone on the road. When you enter a house, first say, 'Peace to this house.' If a man of peace is there, your peace will rest on him. If not, it will return to you."
Lord, what do you have to say to us through your word today? Thank you. Okay, so why don't we, in 2s and 3s, we'd normally spend longer, I'm sorry, because this is a really important passage. A lot of people that talk about missional movements will sit with this passage. What did you notice? Chat with your neighbour. or in a small group. Don't worry if you don't know what it means. Just what did you notice? And maybe a question, because sometimes the questions are way more important. Okay? Just for a couple of minutes. Do you need more time? Do you need more time? You're okay? Okay. Who would like to throw out some things that you noticed or any insights that you had? Meet them where they're at. Nice. It's a bit bizarre, isn't it? It's a bit bizarre. Just saying. Where he was about to go?
Yes, so they meet us before they meet Jesus.
Okay.
Verse 3, God sending you out like lambs among wolves. I've noticed, even in just the last 10 years, the context when we do that has shifted from just mere tolerance to, in many cases, out and out opposition. So the climate is changing, so that idea of being out into the wolves is much more real now than it used to be.
Excellent. Thank you.
Maybe, but the tremendous vulnerability in the sense that Jesus tells them to lay aside. Then they may in fact have money, have a whole lot of things, but even if they do, Jesus say, don't take them with you, and you're going to be really dependent on the people that you go to.
You're going to be dependent on the people you're going to.
Yeah, and traditionally we'd like to go as the people with power, bringing...
We've got the good news,
Yeah.
and we can give it to you.
Yeah.
Interesting. Could you all hear what Adele was saying? Or just my smart responses?
The vulnerability that Jesus asked them to go out with. So, like we sort of observed that, sometimes we feel like we can't do things because we haven't got the resources. But actually, in this situation, it wasn't that maybe they had the resources, but Jesus said, don't take them. And therefore, he was expecting that they would be very dependent upon the people that they were going to. And usually, in our ministry roles, we like to be this, have a sense of strength, and we're resourced and we're bringing things. In a sense we are, but there was this tremendous vulnerability where they would be dependent upon the people they were going to and dependent on God.
Dependent on the people they're going to. And my smart response was, we've usually had a posture of, we've got what you need. And we've got, Jesus says, feed the hungry. It's really easy to do that going, and we can lose a restoring God's image in them kind of posture. I wrote down there, travel light. I think that's really important if we're going to start something new. Travel light. You don't need to take the kitchen sink. Yes.
The Lord appointed. It was a sovereign act, He did it. So that should give us confidence, even if we're lacking in knowledge and lacking in resources.
What's your name?
Joy.
Thank you, Joy. Wow, so Jesus has sent us. Wow. That's the cosmic ruler of the universe. Believes in you. Oh. I'm sorry. Sorry for those who are watching this.
I think the tricky question sometimes for me is, am I being sent? Is this God sending me, or am I doing this under my own initiative? That whole area.
Thanks, Mark. Ask God to send someone else. Yeah. Thank you for that. Yes, go on. We heard what you said.
It's the Lord's harvest.
It's the Lord's harvest.
And it's work.
And it's work.
He's sending out workers.
Excellent. It's the Lord's harvest. Okay, so we could do this one more, and then we'll... They had to be the answer to their own prayer. Receive hospitality. That's a humbling. Look for God at work. Now, who is the person of peace? That's a key one. Say peace. Those words weren't there, but peace be with you, peace on you. If the peace stayed there, then God's at work. Okay, so pay attention. If the peace comes back to you, that's okay. Don't take it personally. Just move on. And then it says, don't move from house to house. It carries on, but anyway, there's some things that are just bizarre. So there are some principles, okay, scriptural that we can draw from that passage. Let me just, what do you notice? The key word is, we don't know what God is doing, we discover what God's doing. So in our mission planning process, and when Vanya's working with you and that kind of stuff, the key word is discover. We can plan, if once we've got an idea that God's asking us to do this, then we plan. And use good strategic planning and good resourcing and that reason and all that kind of stuff. But let's not assume that we know what it looks like. Let's discern what God is saying and then we plan, okay? Kiwi Church, it's a bit hard to see, but that's a bunch of circles around some other shapes. And these circles represent communities in our network. I'm always a bit reluctant to talk about. I love talking about it because they're our family. We are together on this. But I'm also a little reluctant because it still feels like we're just getting started. Okay, so please hear that this is not the answer. This is our story. But all of these different circles are communities, except it needs updating because a couple of those have stopped. How to start something from scratch. Sometimes we need to stop things if we're going to start something, just saying, but I think you know that. And so they're quite different in the way they're expressed. Some are geographical around Christchurch, one's in West Otago. And the idea is that they're hosted by people, ordinary people, who host it. But difference to a house church, they don't have a worship time or a Bible study they do relationship. They just do relationship. They might have at our brunch the other day, brunch is so easy to do as a bring and share. Because I do the bacon on the barbecue and people bring eggs and people bring hash browns and croissants, and it's just so easy, but man, the food's great. And I said, hey, so what does it mean for you to flourish? Incredible how deep the conversation goes as people reflected on that. Oh, when I'm flourishing, what am I doing? And so that it builds relationships. One question. But the pressure isn't on that host to be there. They are their pastor. That's how pastoral care is done in Kiwi Church, is that community look after each other, except for like the crisis stuff, and then I will step in, or someone like Heather. But the pressure isn't on them. People from those circles come to the triangles, which are worship gatherings. One's called Thin Place. That's a Celtic term. So when the Celts were out, so when I say Celts, we're talking 500-ish, a bit later AD, through to 950, around about that. Ireland, Scotland, Northern England. It was an organic movement of God that was a replicating network of churches and missionaries going out, and an incredible, Ireland was Christianized, to use that kind of language. They went from pagan to Christian, the whole country, in a sense. Scotland, and then Northern England. And the reason I love them so much is that they're very organic, they're very earthy, very similar DNA to Māori spirituality. Relationship with the land's really important. Supernatural wasn't super, it was just natural. This kind of stuff. So, I can't remember why I told that story, we're coming to it later. So we gather, Thin Place, thank you. It's a Celtic phrase. They come across a place and they go, wow, God seems really, the barrier between heaven and earth is tissue paper thin. So when we gather, why are we doing this? Because we want to meet with God. We want God to be, okay? So Thin Place. Michelle in the early days would say to the boys, we're going to church tomorrow. No, we're not going to church, we're going to Thin Place. You think, oh, Daryl, you're just being insert your word here. But the language is really, we spend a lot of time, we've got people who used to be in church. We're not going to church, guys. We are church. The gym is around inner fitness, so we look at spiritual disciplines. We've been incredibly helped and formed by spiritual disciplines and the contemplative. This is the new monastic kind of thing. Jesus seemed to me that when he said, abide with me, spiritual disciplines help us abide with him. They don't get us favor with God. They give us a framework to meet with him and be changed. Then we've got Outdoors Church. Did I tell you about that? Okay. I'll tell you about that soon. Art and Faith, which is now called Making Time. Talking with Lana Marquin. Man, she's a talented artist. And it just reminded me, we've got the Saturday morning once a month where the artists gather. And it's contemplative, but it's also loud because they talk a lot. And they have great morning teas, so it's about the time I turn up. But they're being creative. I think the poets and the artists are going to lead the church. Two growing edges in Kiwi opportunity in New Zealand, Aotearoa, is outdoors and creativity. And what does it look like to be church in those spaces? Be doing mission in those spaces. And then the arrow is we're trying to help people go out and about in our daily lives. We are missionaries. So that's a background. I'm going to tell you the process that others have written about, and then I'll tell you a couple of Kiwi Church stories. Does that sound okay? Any questions or people want to? Okay, so the Fresh Expressions movement, that's what it really looks like. It's messy. That's our organisational chart, okay? Yeah, anyway. Third Sunday we have Digging Deeper. So first Sunday is Manaakitanga Sundays, where those circles all meet and build relationship. And there are people in some of those that I've never met. I think that's great. That is their church. Then people from those communities come to Thin Place. We have sung worship before it starts because not everyone is into sung worship, but some people are. So we do that because that's our background. The third Sunday is Digging Deeper, where we've been digging deeper into Scripture, recognising we need to go deeper into that. So we spend an hour doing that, and we're just about to start a Digging Deeper prayer beforehand. Beer and Barbecue Church is having a wee pause. Well, we went away for 3.5 months, and I do that. And there was people taking the load while I was away in all kinds of ways. So and it's struggling, to be fair. We're kind of going, where's the place where it's the safe place for people who aren't interested in any of those other things, meeting God. But I mean, we had great years with Beer and Barbecue Church when it was in our house. It's when it left our house because it was too big and we were tired. So it's interesting things to reflect on. Then when there's a fifth Sunday, we deliberately go outdoors and we meet God outdoors. We do things as we walk, tramp in the hills or by the beach or through the forest. If today we could spend quite a couple of hours on why that is a really fantastic opportunity for gathering as God's people with the land. The age group is, we just had our first person pass away, elderly man. So we had two 89-year-olds. One of them's my dad. He wasn't the one that passed away. He turns up, has no idea what's going on. So it kind of makes me smile. But we sing How Great Thou Art because he loves it. What song should we sing? What nurtures us? We've got quite a chunk in the Gen Age, I'd say Gen X, my age kind of like 50 through to 65. That's probably a big chunk. We've got 3 or 4, we did have 5 families with kids, so primary school age, and a handful of preschoolers, but very small number of 20-somethings. That's like 4 or 5 maybe. Yeah, not a whole lot of 30s either. So there's about, I know it's not about numbers, but just so you kind of, there's about, I would say there's 80 or 90 people that would say Kiwi Church was their home in those circles. They're connected. If you met them, they're part of church, they'd say, oh yeah, we're part of Kiwi Church. Now, do people from the circles all turn up to Thin Place, which worship's the main thing, isn't it? And that's been a tension because the Christians want to go, why aren't we seeing them on Sunday if they're in that barbecue thing? It's like, no, that's church. Is it really? Yeah. So there's our model. A few years ago, so monastic communities, with monks and those kind of things, and the Celts, they would have what they call way of life. Some desert fathers call them rule of life. Rule's a bit tough. It actually comes from the word ruler. We call ours rhythm of life. And I wrote a whole lot of things that we would sign up for. If you're going to be part of this community, you're going to sign up to the rule of life. This is a monastic community, remember? Okay, so not all churches, I think all churches could do it, but that's okay. And I had about a dozen things, and they nodded and said politely, that's lovely, Daryl, and I could tell they rolled their eyes. I mean, that was an experiment to go, hey, shall we do this? And it crashed and burned. So, okay, I still think it's really important. A friend of mine, Joshua Spanky Moore, in the Anglican movement, he did a gathering, created this gathering called Vocatio for 20-somethings or and early 30s. Angry, some were angry, had left church, some were angry at God, some were atheist. But he said, we're going to do this young adults thing, and guess what they had to do? They had to sign up to a rule of life. If you're going to be part of this, in this community, you're going to commit to these 4 words: rest, pray, notice, bless. So I borrowed those. Rest, like let's be serious about Sabbath rest, because our culture is nuts. And what's Jesus' answer to it? God's answer is Sabbath. And it's not resting because we're exhausted. It's Hebrews talks about entering into God's delight, which is what did God do on the 7th day? Delighted in all that God had made. Recreated. We put B instead of prayer, because prayer, some of our people were allergic to prayer. But when we've sat with it and went, no, prayer is actually being with God, communing with God, and expanding the whole world, we use be instead. Let's be with God. Let's stroll with God. And notice is noticing God in our everyday lives and responding. So we're committing to that. And then we're committing to bless. Bless our neighbour, each other, our enemy, the traveller. Okay, so there's the missional. So we've committed to those 4 words. And it's a trellis because that's a rule. That a rule is like, or a way of life is like a trellis that gives something for your life to grow on. Okay? So that's an important aspect of our life together, because otherwise we're not growing, we're just strolling. So how do we be intentional? We stroll and we grow. So I could talk for hours about that. There's, we do have some teenagers, I forgot about them, sorry. We painted the trellis in groups, and then one Sunday we were outdoors and the 4 of them put it together. And we have this in our, in where we meet, and it reminds us that that's how we've agreed to grow together. The Fresh Expressions in the UK, the Protestant Church of the Netherlands, they've got a whole department in their church for pioneering ministries, and they've got this model which is very similar. Michael Warner's the guy I mentioned. They all have their own kind of process if they're going to start something from scratch. They're actually all the same, they just use slightly different language, so I've combined them all into the model that they talk about, okay? First thing they do, they say, number 1 is listen. I've asked Adia to, where did that mic end up? Sorry, Murray. I've asked Adia to talk about your experience in the Hawke's Bay, and Eric's if you feel like it, in terms of what was, in your training, what this exercise was, and just kind of the headlines of what went on.
The idea is that before we move into any action, or I guess assume that we know what our community needs, or come rocking up with the answer to what everybody is after, is this exercise of being really present and paying attention and listening. So we gathered a group of folk, and my the group that I worked with were a group from our church of only 2 or 3 people who I think were doing it as much to help me as they were about being passionate about the exercise, which was probably some of the limit of what I experienced. But it's still tremendously worthwhile in the sense that there's this sort of structure where over a period of weeks we were doing like a Lectio Divina with the Luke 10 passage. So spending a lot of time together, reading, quietly, thinking, reflecting, sharing. And then each week, so, oh gosh, I can't even remember over how many weeks we did it. Might have been 4 or 5 times that we met. And in between, we were going out, we made a commitment to be going out into our neighbourhoods, or we were an inner city church, so into that inner city space, just walking and paying attention. And I think each week there were, or each time there may have been something different that we were, a particular point of focus. But it was really, paying attention, listening, seeing what we could see, and then we would come back together and we would pull the things that we had observed And over the period of the time that we were together, we were building up a picture or a sense of what is really going on in our context. What are people saying? What are we hearing? What are we observing? At all kinds of levels. So it wasn't just people. It was litter. It was rundown buildings. It was just really, really paying attention in a prayerful kind of a way. And at the end of that process, we then prayerfully worked together to come up with some appropriate kind of response or some sort of missional activity. In our case, I set up a little table outside our church with a wee sign saying free prayer. Nobody came for prayer, but just that very simple sense of being, because we were right in the centre of town, to just quietly be present and available seemed really appropriate for our context.
Fantastic, thank you. I'm convinced God is more interested in who you become than what you do. Absolutely convinced. Dallas Willard says, who's the person, if you were to live forever, who's the person you want to become? And so what Adair said right at the beginning then, we don't want to presume that we're going to start something. And as someone else who was doing the exercise a few years before, in their internship, they ran this community party in the park. They did so much work and set it all up, and they were going to do this wonderful event, and they did all the marketing, all that kind of stuff. And it was actually really sad because no one came. Yeah, I know, all that work. And I said to the person afterwards, I said, so did anyone actually ask the community if they wanted that? Yeah, no, they didn't. Love and serve. So we listen, and we listen to people, and we love and serve. Which is, we could unpack it some more, but love and serve. And community forms just by loving and serving them, because we're going to love and serve, and we've talked about that enough today. Then share Jesus or explore faith. As community is built, and we're having this, we're getting to we're actually real friends. We're not just friends because we want them in church. Naturally, the Jesus conversation will come up if Jesus is good news, But we don't want to force that, and we also don't want to do it right at the beginning. And these guys, I agree with them in their opinion. And discover, that's reformatted. And in that process, you discover being church. Okay, so that's the simple kind of format that they would suggest. And as I said, I looked at some of the Kiwi church things we've done, and I'll give you a couple of examples. But can I add to this as well? Start with prayer. The Father, the Son, and Spirit are in divine, intimate, perfect love relationship, and we join in that conversation that's going on between the Father, the Son, and the Spirit. That's prayer. Okay, sometimes we think we're praying to God. If we're joining in the conversation that's already going on, what's Jesus praying about? Okay, that actually has to be at the center. And sometimes we miss that. And then I'm going to be surprised if you can even see this. No, you can't. So there's a red dial in there that the fancy word is theological reflection. Don't be turned off by that word. It's simply sitting with scripture and history and context or culture and thinking, we've noticed this in the neighbourhood. Let's reflect on that. You did theological reflection this morning when you sat with scripture and saying, what is church? You sat with history, because we know how church has been expressed. And in a sense, without talking about it, we sat with our culture going, what is important for humanity? What is important for our neighbours? The most significant, after the earthquakes, we reflected together and we thought, what is the most missional and evangelical thing we can do today in this season after the earthquakes? Listen. That's what the church can do. And the church did great, actually, in Christchurch. We come out of it smelling pretty good. But sometimes we miss the scripture part. because we think we know what we're going to do. So there's the model. The Knox Centre, this was before I got there, but they come up with, there's a time frame of 7 years here. If you can't see that, the first year is listen, connect, form a team. Year 2, discern, experiment, build community. Year 3 is build community, is building. We start to disciple, start to form leaders. Year 4 to 5, year 6 to 7, form leaders, contextual worship. So worship hasn't started just yet. Now, they didn't make that up out of thin air. They read a lot of literature and a lot of stories about what God is doing around the world. And that process there is the same as the circle. Everyone's saying the same thing. So I think there's something in it if you want to start something from scratch. Any questions or comments about that? And then I'll give you a couple of case studies. I'll give this to Vanya. I'll give a PDF to Vanya if you want to have this, save your writing things down. Is that okay, Vanya? Which has to be what day do you finish? This is my wife, Michelle, standing by a Celtic high cross in Ireland. It's 5 metres high. It's the tallest one we understand. The Celts, they weren't illiterate people, and they're like stained glass windows in the cathedrals. The crosses were carved with the gospel stories, and people would gather. And what happens when you go and look at something like that? What do you physically do? Same with cathedrals and stained glass windows. People, and they, and we embody our worship. Sometimes we just stand, but when we embody worship. So they would look at that. Anyway, so the Celtic missional movements, when they would move around the country, and when they got to where they thought God was leading them, or sometimes they're in a coracle with just the tide taking them a little boat, the first thing they would do was establish a rhythm of prayer. 7 times a day, we're going to pray in this place. First thing they did. Oh, that's interesting. Then they formed community, which they called a village of heaven, or a colony of heaven, but colony is kind of not a great word these days, but village of heaven. We want to establish heaven here, and they committed to a way of life. Practiced hospitality to whoever was there, and the Celtic monastery was usually in the village, not out in the desert. They deliberately were in town. And actually towns gathered around them. I mentioned earlier, there's no kind of heaven and earth split. Everything is God's. They would constantly pray through their songs and their habits. There's no hierarchy or gender power split. A lot of women in leadership. And Anam Cara is the soul friend. And so the role of the Anam Cara is this person that would help you keep to the way of life. If you've signed up for this thing, you need help to stick to it, and that's who your Anam Cara is. Heather Simpson at Paeroa is now with us at Kiwi Church, and she's my Anam Cara. She is fantastic. I couldn't do what I'm doing without Heather Simpson. So if you're going to start something from scratch, make sure someone's in your corner, because it can feel really lonely. But that's how the Celts would do it. All right? Okay, time to do some work because you've been listening way too long. Kiwi Church case study. We found we were meeting with people who had left church, in some cases 15 years ago. So we need to do a little bit of work listening to them. You're going to do that now. You've got in groups. You've got a list of things on your handout from A to O. Don't spend too much time on it. Just go through and go, out of this list, which is the top 2 or 3? Which are important? And which didn't feature in the research? And when I say the research, I'll tell you later whose research it is. Some of it was ours, but most of it was from other people's. Any questions? Sorry. So read through the list. Which in between A and O, these are people, I didn't read this out. For people who had left church, they were done with church, or they were de-church, they weren't in church anymore, but they pretty much still had faith. Which of these things were in their top 2 or 3 list if they wanted to be part of a faith community? Which are the things that didn't feature, they didn't care about? And I would do it that way around, because then the rest are the important ones. So they're absolutely vital, and the ones that didn't feature, and the rest. Any questions about that? Do it together. And just go number one, number A. Where does that fit in the three categories? Another minute or so. Okay. I'm sorry to rush you on. If you haven't finished, that's okay, because we're not going to mark it. What we're doing is listening to our context, and our context were people who have left church. Your context will be something else. This is just what God was doing, and that's the place we found ourselves in. So it's really important to remember that that we're listening to the de-churched. This was through interviews and those kind of things. What your context would be, what is an idea of how you might listen? It's not a trick question. Think about a people group that you might want to listen to. What's an idea about how you could listen to them? Create an environment where they can talk, and the other one? Go into their environment, either or, and listen. So we're not talking rocket science, is what I'm trying to say. And so the top 2 or 3 out of all the research, and if anyone gets these, you get it. Number 1 was nurture authentic relationships. The other one, help people feel like they belong regardless of involvement. So some people felt like when they had a baby, stopped serving in the teams, suddenly didn't feel like I belonged anymore because, includes tolerance and respect for others, informal, adaptable, egalitarian and inclusive environment, and permission for people to be real, expression of faith must be authentic. That's what they cared about. They had left church because that wasn't happening, remember. So we thought, well, if you want to be in a faith community, we probably need to prioritise those things. Okay? As I said, who wants to guess what didn't feature in the research at all? Songs more up to date? Coffee? Preaching more in line to my day-to-day issues? Worship times more suitable? Didn't feature at all. These are people who had left church, which means that wasn't the reason they left. It was all the other reasons. So all the ones we just said, and then all the others on your list were really important. They just didn't make the top 2, 3 or 4. So that was challenging for us. So if we're going to be serving that group of people, if we're going to love and serve them, we've got to keep that kind of stuff in mind. Do they align, the previous ones, do they align with kingdom values? I hope so. I hope so. I don't know how to, and they're all the others, okay? I'm pleased you've got all a handout. There was a few others as well that didn't make your list. No one must agree with anyone in leadership. There was no expectation you had to agree with me. How to connect God's story with their story. When we import things from particularly overseas, let's be careful with them, and because people are deeply suspicious of those things. Leaders need to be male and female, clergy and lay, have some humility, and everything have a sense of invitation. So, real quick, following this process, hard to see Bill. Bill passed away while we were overseas, and we cried. It was incredibly sad because he was an inaugural member of Beer and Barbecue Church. We connected with him because his wife was part of our previous church, and she was a real prayer. He never attended church, hated church. So Michelle would visit her and then continued to visit after Margaret had died, continued visiting Bill. And I'd visit sometimes and we'd share stories and stuff. Started Beer and Barbecue Church, and he actually said, have you and Michelle ever thought about doing your own church one day? And we were. So here's Bill, hates church, God speaking through him to us to start something. I said, well, we're thinking about something. He goes, oh, well, you should do that. So we started Beer and Barbecue Church. Bill was there and would come every time. He was leaving one day, and so we loved and served Bill. There was no expectations. What's the next thing? Community was formed. We talked about Jesus quite deliberately. Who is Jesus and who cares? So what? And then we discovered we were church because we had 4 relationships. We had health, we had a relationship with God, we had a relationship with each other, we had a relationship with the community through each of our lives. Tenuous, I know, but still, and relationship with the wider church because I was a Presbyterian minister. They didn't care about that. So that authentic church, healthy church, mature? No, but we're just starting. Okay, so I would have a thought for the day, which was usually like a question. And we often had a gospel story and go, what's that about? What's going on here, do you think? and because they had opinions. Aaron and Karen, I was having lunch with a friend one day, a regular lunch, and he told me about this friend of his who said he's been out of church for 15 years, but he rang me, he said he wanted me, Hans, to pray a blessing on their marriage for their wedding anniversary because he didn't know what to get his wife. So if we're coming over, can you pray a blessing on our marriage, please? Because you're a Christian. And he respected him. I'm sitting there having lunch. Click, 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 click. Sometimes the click's slow. I think God's doing something here. I could feel it. So had to have some courage and go, I want to meet that guy. He hosted both our couples, and Vertical One was started. Vertical One is one of those circles. We meet once a month for a meal, 4 couples. We have something to talk about that goes deep because we want vertical, and we connect with God. Has all 4 things in present. The main thing is fantastic food. And one of my friends said the other day, it's 6 or 7 years ago, it's one of the most authentic Christian expressions I've ever been part of, and people were the most vulnerable they'd ever been. We're leaving one night, and someone had a lot of pain in their life and their history, and a lot of pain caused by the church. And there was some anger and some tears and some, real. And it was fine. We were present. It was fine. And but it was incredibly hard for this person. But I'm driving away, pretty excited, and I said to Michelle, "You can tell it's been a good day in church when there's been plenty of F-bombs." I thought it was funny. Because we don't say that word in church, do we? In our church gatherings. We did in that church gathering because someone felt safe enough to actually disclose what was really going on in their life. They'd given up. They were exhausted being the Christian. They had so much incredible hurt in their lives. And real church. Loved and served. Had meals together. They served us. Some of them are foodies. It's like going to a restaurant. Talked about Jesus. Discovered we were church. And that's, for 2 of the couples, that's their church. That's the only, when they say, what's your church? Vertical One. Once a month. Oh, is that often enough? Don't know. Church is really simple. We've done that. Church Refugees, a book, American book. Churchless Faith, Alan Jameson in the 90s did his PhD on people who had left church. Kevin Ward's work, he's a New Zealand retired Baptist pastor, Presbyterian lecturer. You can get those. But that's where all that data's from, plus Kiwi Church. So that was our people group. We listened to them. And then we tried things. And we tried all kinds of things, and they continue, some don't. This is a whole lot of stuff about Kiwi Church. Some of our challenges were Christians. That's not church. Expectations. Like, are we getting a return on our investment here? Spiritual contesting. When Jesus said, protect us from the evil one, I think he meant it. If you're going to start something new, whatever your theology is, Jesus said it, so you have to figure it out. I'm not going to tell you what that looks like. I can tell you from experience it's real. And Western world is the only culture that seems to have a problem with it. That sounded a bit emphatic. I'm sorry. I don't mean to be like, that's the way it is. Our leadership style. I read all these books and they said, you've got to be a gardener and a farmer and a midwife, and you've got to let God do this stuff. And so I'd gone from a leadership style of, come on everyone, let's do this. And everyone goes, yeah, that'll be great. And then one day Michelle said to me, what are you doing? I said, what do you mean? She goes, look, I'm used to you going, let's do this, and now you're not doing anything. Well, I'm trying to be a farmer and a midwife. But I realized I had to do something, because a good farmer, I saw this guy standing out. Any farmers here before I tell the story? Connor? I was driving through North Canterbury, beautiful part of the country, and this guy standing, this is a farmer. I was going through a stage in my life as a church leader thinking, boy, that looks a good job. What was he doing? And observing what? What's going on? Yeah. And responding to what he saw. So we're observing what God's doing. Is that you, God? I don't know. Let's try this, and maybe it was more. I don't know if it was. Okay. I had to figure out physical space, me. I was the biggest problem. Books will tell you that if you're going to start something new, you're the one that will probably be formed the most. And that was my experience. I had the biggest imposter syndrome that you could possibly imagine, that I'd walk in and go, who am I to do this? Who knows? Someone here may today have thought, I'd love to do that, and then thought, oh, yeah, but who am I to do that? I'm an imposter. Do you know what? You are. Because if you've never done it before, and you try, you've never done it before. That's so you're an imposter. Good, eh? Pop quiz. Oh, did anyone get all 4 of those? Because I had prizes of the de-churched. Yeah, who got 2? Oh, too many got 2. Did anyone get 3? How many got 3? 1, 2, you get a chocolate. What's your name? Glenn. Well done, Glenn. Oops, sorry. It's a terrible throw. Okay, piece of paper and a pen. Pop quiz. We're going to do this real quick because, man, time goes fast in Kaimai. It went slower in Christchurch when I was going through this. Yeah, the Grey Rock story. Yeah. I won't forget. I wrote it up here. You ready? Now our context, we're listening. Our context is just Kiwis. All right? Think about your town. You ready? You're not allowed to do this. You don't get a chocolate if you do well because you've done this before. How many Kiwis report that they are religious? This is 2017, okay? So forgive me if it's changed since then. A, 15. How many Kiwis report that they are religious?
Religious or spiritual?
That's all I've got for you, sorry. 15%, 27%, 42 or 53. Okay? Here we go. Number 2. How many Kiwis report they believe in God? Actually, we should do this in groups, shouldn't we? You like this? Competitive, eh? You want the chocolate. Believe in God. You ready? We're listening to our context. Sometimes it takes some work to sit down with our census figures and go, who is our community? How many people believe in a life force or a spirit in New Zealand, Kiwi culture? And last one, how many people pray several times a week or more? How many people pray several times a week or more? Okay. What was the first one? How many people say they religious? What'd you get? I think we got all 4. Here we go. 42%. In Matamata, that is 42% is 3,654 people. What is it in your town? That's if Wikipedia is right that there's, say, 8,700 people live in this town.
That's not necessarily Christian, is it?
This is what people say about their own lives. So this is important. It's a good question because this is important for our listening. Is when we're listening, are we interpreting what we think they mean or what do they mean? Oh, you're religious. What is that like for you? Tell me about that. And then listen. Let's not assume that they think religion is what, you know what I mean. Okay. Did anyone get C? Oh, not many though. Competitive. Look around to see who you're against now. Jeff Troughton came to visit us at Alpine. And wow, it is getting old. It's time I updated this. But there's data from the New Zealand Attitudes and Values Society, the International Social Survey Program, and the New Zealand Census. Okay, so this is good data back in 2015. I don't think it's changed. Report they believe in God. 58% of people in New Zealand believe in God. That is, in this town, 5,000 people. 5,000 people out here believe in God. Okay, next one. This is a goodie. Life force or spirit? People say we're a secular nation. The stats don't tell us that. People say almost 3/4, almost 3 in 4 people you meet believe in some kind of thing that we can't see. Now, what is that? I don't know. Why don't you tell me more about that? Because we're listening. And the last one, 37%, 3,200 people in Matamata pray, now listen, several times a week or more. Let's say conservatively 10% of people are in organised Christian church. That is, what do I say? That's about 800 people. Here's the question for us, if we're going to start something new for these people. What does it look like to listen to this group? 3,000 people that are praying. Let's talk with your neighbour. What is it? How can we listen to them? We've got 3,000 people to listen to in Matamata, or in Hamilton, we've got tens of thousands. Talk with your neighbour. What does it mean to listen to them? And who got 4? Wow. Well done. Anyone else get 4? Who got 3? You've had? You got 2 chocolates. Did you get 3? Someone over here got 3? Follow-up question, while you're talking about it, what does it mean to love and serve these people? These 3,000 people in this town that pray regularly. Listen, love and serve. What does it mean to listen to them and love and serve them? Okay, let's throw out some ideas. What does it mean to listen to them? How would we do that? Got to find them? Does anyone in this room know anyone outside of their church? Awesome. I actually don't have many non-Christian friends. I joined a football club to make friends, then had a health thing, going back to my football club next year. I went to visit them and watch them play last week, and they were really pleased to see me. It was lovely. So I'm looking forward to being friends, and, you know, because sometimes, particularly pastors, it's not good. But you've got people who aren't in church or may not be in any kind of church. I wonder what it would mean to listen to them about the things of this nature. What it would mean to love and serve them.
To be humble.
Yep.
We need to be humble because there's a lot
Need to be humble.
we can learn from other spiritual disciplines. Prayer, for example, discipline of prayer,
Yep.
which a lot of times in Christian circles we can take our discipline of prayer for granted. But if we look at, for example, our Muslim friends, their commitment to the routine of prayer, just one example.
Thank you. Challenging. I'm not saying it's easy, it's simple. But love and serve, community is formed. The problem is we can only make friends with so many people, which then means you can only do, get to know them deep enough for them to trust to form, to have these kind of conversations. But let's not rush to the Jesus conversation. Oh, you're interested in spiritual things. What would help you explore that interest? It's a great question. Oh, well, I actually like walking in the hills. I like walking in the hills. Is that church? What could we do together? This is just a plug for your mission planning process that I said earlier. We discern and then plan. Can I just implore you as congregations, don't be too fast to write your plan. The process of mission planning is about forming us and our discipleship and listening to God and saying, God, what are you doing? It's like a river. We like the river. So what it is, it's an opportunity to ask questions. I wasn't asked today to do a plug for mission planning. As I was preparing, I was reflecting on a 10-year process with Alpine, and people who just wanted to get it out the door, they didn't change a bit. In fact, one person wrote their mission plan on an A4 page and handed it in. Great, now we can get a minister. It's like, no. Just listen to God, and what is God inviting you to do? Who is God inviting you to be? I'm sorry if you just wrote a plan and asked for a minister. I'm sorry. But this wasn't, it's an opportunity to work together and for us to form us. You know that program. If God's birthing something, what's the midwife's role? It's not a passive role. Believe me. And how arrogant of me to say to a bunch of half full of women, Then trust the process. What risks? We were going to do this together. You can think of your own risks. I've got a few. Oh, you can't read this. You go too fast, you're impatient, you don't start at all because you think you're an imposter. Let's try it for 3 months. Give yourself some freedom to stop it. Let's just try this for 3 months and see 3 months and see how it goes. It's an incredibly freeing decision. We forget that it's God's. We just ran an event in Coracle and we didn't have clarity about why we were doing it, and so it didn't go as well as it could have. So why are we doing this? That's a risk, that if you're going to do something new, be really clear on why you're doing it. So often we think what our expectations aren't met. What are God's expectations? God, what are you expecting in terms of the timing? We've been doing this for 3 years. Is that okay? We don't have people coming to faith. We've done some baptisms, but they were Christian families. And I'm so frustrated with that. It's like, God, how come we wanted people to come to faith? We wanted people to hear the good news. Whenever I sit down and, lament, all I get, you're okay, just keep going. You're doing what I've asked you to do. And people who are Christians are finding a fresh and depth of spirituality and relationship with God that they've never experienced before. So I have to go, well, that's good. However, if a Celtic model is a village of heaven, and when people encounter that village and they go, oh my goodness, who are these people? I mean, that's a fantastic evangelistic tool. So in 5 years' time, if I'm ever invited back and we're still not seeing people come to faith, I better have a good story, eh? Because that would be bad. Entrepreneurs' expectations. A guy said to me, oh, you underestimate what can happen and overestimate in 1 year, seriously underestimate in 5. And that is true, but not in God's economy. For the first year, that was helpful because I thought, okay, I'm way overestimating. So that was 5. That was fine. I was more relaxed. After 5 years, still nothing was really going that well. So yeah, be careful with pioneering entrepreneurial science. It's helpful, but God is more helpful. Ask the right questions. How do we fix the church decline is the wrong question. Here's a question with 3 minutes to go. So here's a little bomb. What if God's in the decline? I have a friend. What if God's doing something in the decline? The Reformation was a pretty big deal. Not saying we're in a Reformation, but what if, so wouldn't that shift our posture to go, oh, hang on a sec, if God's doing this or letting this happen, so what are you doing, God, instead? Because Jesus said, I will build my church. So what questions are we asking? Andrew Norton, who was a beautiful man, said, ask beautiful questions. This will be on the notes. He helped us out a lot in Alpine. He'd come down and beautiful questions don't have all the answers. I think I've said most of that. This is a summary slide. Where there's energy, if there's discontent in energy, pay attention to your energy. Hurts, hopes, and dreams. Our posture with, not at or for. We've tried that as a church in our community. We want to be with our community. What does it mean to be a flourishing human being? Which I think is the good news. Give it a go. Be in a community of encouragement. I think. Forget about balance. We can't, it's impossible to balance lives. Find rhythms. And you're starting something new. We have different rhythms and seasons. Practice gratitude, generosity, hospitality. Prioritize discipleship. What does Jesus mean for you? Know your motives. Why am I doing this? Is it so I can look good? Is this so I can have people like me? For me to find my own value? And find your people. You can't do this on your own. And I've talked about Heather. One of my favourite quotes, Graham Cray. We don't know how to do authentic Christian living. It's like having a jigsaw. We don't have the picture and we don't also have all the pieces. Can you imagine that, you jigsaw lovers? We don't have the picture of the box and we don't have all the pieces yet because God's doing it. We don't know what it looks like. All we can do is, oh, here's another piece. Where does that fit? Got to have faith. Amen. 3 o'clock. Okay, so we're sitting in thin place. We want to be intergenerational, remember? We're sitting in thin place and people come in and there's a bunch of river rocks on the floor. And everyone picked up a river rock. And they were sitting with it, didn't know why. And I don't preach, but we do this. It's interactive. It takes as much prep as preaching, believe me. And we're having this conversation. And we always start with a psalm because that's what the monks do. They knew the psalms off by heart because it becomes images become in your heart and it gets you through the day sometimes, every time. And God is our rock. So everyone, God's our rock. You've been sitting with your rock. What does that teach us about God? So I had the whiteboard and all the Christians said, firm foundation. Oh yeah, that's good. And we did all the Christian answers. And a teenager who's on the spectrum a little, he went, grey. Oh, God's grey, a bit like Gandalf, yeah? And I'm writing grey, and because this is online, I was ashamed, all right? So just, this, this was bad. But I was ashamed. I wrote grey thinking, oh my goodness, what am I going to do with that? Smiled. And the 8-year-old goes, hard. Oh no, God is hard. Oh no, this is not going how I wanted. Isn't that a terrible thing with church? It's not going how I wanted. Who made it about you, Daryl? It's really messy. Oh, and the others are back.
No, just they decide, they invite who Catherine said, it's 3 o'clock.
Okay.
I'm going to go over because I want to pray, she said.
Oh, we're not praying. And it's like, okay, we carried on. I said what I wanted to say. People said things. It's fine. We're leaving. And I'm actually standing by the door, which was random. I never do that, but I was standing by the door. A good Presbyterian minister, please come in. Don't, yeah. And a woman came up to me and said, quietly, she was a little bit, when he said, God is grey, I thought, that's exactly how God is for me. I can't see what's going on. It's all fuzzy. It's foggy. I'm lost. I'm confused. And yet I met God in that moment. And I was smiling. Oh, that's awesome, isn't it? Yeah, that's great. Daryl, you dingbat. Tuesday, true story. Tuesday, cafe, sitting chatting with a friend. And she said, when that boy said hard, I felt this, God is really hard and I'm really angry at God at the moment. And here was this facilitated, because we have to be authentic with God. Let's give up pretending, Christians, please. God wants us to come and be authentic with God. But that was this moment, and I'm sitting there going, okay, I get it, God. Who speaks for God? Every voice. Does every voice have the opportunity in our community? So if we're starting something from scratch, do you want other voices? Because it takes a lot of pressure off you if you can imagine God will speak through everyone else in the community. Amen.
On the Salvation Army website, there's a neat A4 page, lots of diagrams, 45 ways to encounter God. It encapsulates much of what you can do.
Great. Good old Sally's. Thank you.